She is losing money on both sides of her balance sheet, and she does not know it. I will call her Dana, 34 years old, earns $72,000 a year at a logistics company outside of Charlotte. She has $8,200 in credit card debt at roughly 22% interest. And 6 months ago, she made what felt like the responsible decision. She walked into her HR portal, set her 401k contribution to zero, and told herself she would restart it the moment the credit cards were paid off. On paper, that sounds disciplined. In her head, it felt like finally taking control. But here is what Dana cannot see from inside that decision. Her employer matches 100% of her contributions on the first 3% of her salary. That is $2,160 a year in free money that she is now refusing. Not delaying, refusing. Because the match does not wait. The match her employer would have deposited this month is gone. The match from last month is gone. And every month she stays at zero, another $180 vanishes from a future she has not calculated yet. Meanwhile, the credit card is still charging interest, so Dana is not choosing between paying debt and building wealth. She is paying a fee on her debt and a fee on her absence from her retirement account at the same time. 2 fees, 1 paycheck, and she thinks she is being smart. Now meet Marcus, 36, earns $68,000, works in IT support in Columbus. Marcus has $6,400 in credit card debt at that same 22%. But Marcus went the other direction. He opened a brokerage account last year, set up an automatic $400 a month into an index fund, and decided he would pay minimum payments on the card because, and this is a direct quote from a Reddit thread he read at 2 in the morning, the market averages 10%, so it beats my debt over time. Except his debt is not charging 10%. His debt is charging 22%. That is not a close race. That is not even a race. Every month, Marcus invests $400, hoping for a long-run average of roughly 10%. His credit card balance is silently growing at more than double that rate. He is building a small pile of wealth with one hand, while a bigger pile of debt compounds against him with the other. Marcus also thinks he is being smart. And this is the problem with the question most people ask. They ask, should I pay off debt or invest? As if the answer is one or the other. As if the right move is the same, whether the debt charges 6% or 22%. As if a car loan and a credit card balance and a mortgage and a student loan all belong in the same bucket just because they are all called debt. They do not. The real answer is not debt first or wealth first. The real answer is a sequence, an order of operations. And just like in math class, if you solve things in the wrong order, you can use all the right numbers and still get the wrong answer. That is what this video is about. I am going to walk you through the exact order, layer by layer. Where to put your first available dollar, your second, your third, depending on what kind of debt you carry and what kind of return you are leaving on the table. Not theory, not a vague it depends. A framework you can use with your actual numbers tonight, because there are really only 4 layers to this decision. And most people get at least one of them wrong. Dana got layer 1 wrong. She skipped the only guaranteed return on the board, the employer match, to fight a battle that would have gone better with that money working behind her. Marcus got layer 2 wrong. He ignored the one category of debt where the math is not even debatable, high-interest credit cards, and tried to outrun it with market returns that are not guaranteed in any single year. Both of them looked at the same question. Both of them picked a side. And both of them lost money they did not have to lose. Debt has a price, but so does waiting. And if you have ever sat with your phone open, one tab on your credit card balance, another tab on a retirement calculator, wondering which one deserves the next dollar, this is the video where that question finally gets a real answer. But before we touch debt or investing, we need to talk about something that comes before both. Because neither strategy works if the next car repair sends you straight back to the credit card. Right now, roughly 24% of Americans have zero emergency savings. Nothing. Not $500, not $200, zero. And close to 60% cannot cover a $1,000 surprise without borrowing. That is not a budgeting failure. That is a structural gap. Because when there is no buffer between your income and your life, every unexpected expense becomes new debt. The tire blows out on the highway. The urgent care visit hits on a Sunday. The landlord raises the rent, and the credit card absorbs it at 22% because there was nowhere else for that cost to land. Marcus learned this the hard way. 3 months into his investing experiment, his alternator died on a Tuesday morning in a grocery store parking lot. The repair was $1,100. He did not have it in savings because every spare dollar was going into the brokerage account. So the repair went onto the credit card. The same credit card he was already paying minimums on. His net worth moved backward in one afternoon by more than his index fund had gained in 3 months. That is not bad luck. That is a missing layer. So layer 0 is this. Before you attack debt aggressively, before you open a brokerage account, before you calculate any spread between interest rates and market returns, you need a small emergency buffer. Not 6 months of expenses, not some intimidating number that feels impossible. Somewhere around $1,500 to $2,000 in a savings account you do not touch unless something breaks, someone gets sick, or the car stops running. That is not a wealth strategy. That is a firewall. It exists for one reason only: to keep you from creating new high-interest debt every time life sends an invoice you are not expecting. Once that buffer exists, the real question begins. And the first layer is the one almost nobody talks about. Layer 1. The free money you are probably leaving behind. This is the part of the debt versus investing debate that almost never gets mentioned because it breaks the argument. It does not fit neatly on either side. If your employer offers a 401k match, contributing enough to capture that match is almost always the correct first move. Before extra debt payments, before a brokerage account, before anything else. And the reason is not complicated. The employer match is an instant return on your money that no credit card payoff and no index fund can replicate. Here is what that looks like. The most common match structure on plans tracked by Fidelity is dollar for dollar on the first 3% of salary, then 50 cents on the dollar for the next 2%. So if you earn $65,000 a year and contribute 5%, your employer adds roughly 4%. That is $2,600 a year you did not earn, did not save, did not sacrifice for. It showed up because you checked a box. And yet, 1 in 4 American workers with access to a match is not contributing enough to capture the full amount. 1 in 4. That is not a rounding error. That is millions of people walking past free money on the way to a financial plan that costs more. Dana is one of them. She stopped her contributions entirely to throw everything at credit card debt. And I understand the logic. The debt feels urgent. The 22% interest rate feels like an emergency. But think about what the match actually is. When your employer puts in $1 for every dollar you contribute, that is a 100% return on your money on the day it lands. Not over 10 years, not adjusted for inflation. On that day. There is no credit card in America charging 100% interest. There is no investment on earth that guarantees a 100% return in 24 hours. So even while Dana is right that her credit card debt is expensive, she is wrong about the order. The correct move is to contribute at least enough to capture the full match, and then throw everything else at the high-interest debt. Now someone will say, but what about the interest I am paying on the card while I contribute to the 401k? Fair question. Run it out. Dana earns $72,000. 3% is $2,160 a year, or about $180 a month. If she redirected that $180 to the credit card instead, she would shave a few dollars a month off her interest charges, maybe $3 or $4 in avoided interest for every month she accelerates the payoff. But she would lose $180 in employer match that same month. She saves $3 or $4. She loses $180. That is not a trade-off. That is a net loss every single month disguised as discipline. And here is where the cost becomes enormous. If Dana skips the match for 5 years while she slowly pays off the card, and we project that lost match forward at the market's long-run average of roughly 10% nominal, she does not just lose the $13,000 she missed. She loses what that $13,000 would have become. Over 25 more years of compounding, that 5-year gap grows into something close to $140,000 from a decision that felt like sacrifice but was actually subtraction. There is one exception worth stating. If your credit card debt is so large and so urgent that every single dollar determines whether you eat or miss rent, then survival comes first. But that is a crisis, not a strategy. For the vast majority of people carrying high interest debt and also holding a job that offers a match, the match comes first. It is the only guaranteed triple-digit return available to a normal household. Which brings us to Layer 2. And this is where Marcus finally has to look at his own math. Layer 2. Kill every dollar of debt charging more than roughly 10%. This is the one layer where the debate is actually settled. Not by opinion, not by financial philosophy, by arithmetic. The average credit card interest rate in America right now is just above 21% for accounts carrying a balance. For new card offers, it is closer to 24%. At 22%, a balance of roughly $7,900, which is the current average for Americans who carry credit card debt, costs about $1,700 a year in interest alone. That is not principal. That is the fee you pay for the privilege of still owing the money. And here is the number that should end the debate for anyone holding this kind of debt. If you carry that average balance and make only minimum payments, you will be paying it off for decades. Not years, decades. And the total interest you pay will be several times the original balance. The $7,900 does not cost $7,900. It costs north of $40,000 by the time it is gone. No investment strategy in history has reliably returned 22% per year over a sustained period. The S&P 500 has averaged roughly 10% nominal over the last 100 years, and closer to 7% after inflation. 10 is excellent. 10 built most of the retirement wealth in America. But 10 does not beat 22. It does not come close. So Marcus, sending $400 a month into a brokerage account while his card charges 22%, is doing the mathematical equivalent of pouring water into a bucket with a hole in the bottom. The hole is bigger than the hose. Every month, his net position gets worse, not better, because the debt is compounding faster than the investment. Used car loans belong in this layer too. The average interest rate on a used auto loan right now is above 11%. That is close enough to the market's long-run return that the spread disappears. And unlike a credit card, the car is depreciating while the loan compounds. You are paying interest on something that is losing value. That is not leverage. That is friction. The rule for Layer 2 is simple. If the interest rate is above 10%, pay it off before you invest a single dollar beyond the employer match. Credit cards, used auto loans, payday lending, personal loans at high rates, store financing at deferred interest. Any debt in this category is not a strategic tool. It is a leak, and no portfolio grows fast enough to outrun a leak at 22%. Once Layer 2 is clear, the question gets harder. Because the next category of debt is the one where reasonable people genuinely disagree. Layer 3, the gray zone. And this is where the internet fights happen. When your debt charges somewhere between 6 and 10% interest, the math stops giving you a clean answer. Because the stock market's long-run average sits right in that neighborhood. Over the last 100 years, the S&P 500 has returned roughly 10% a year with dividends reinvested. Adjust for inflation, and it is closer to 7%. Either way, if your debt is at 7 or 8%, the spread between paying it off and investing is narrow enough that you could argue it either direction and not be obviously wrong. Student loans live here. Federal undergraduate loans right now carry a rate of 6.39%. Graduate loans sit closer to 8%. Parent Plus loans are near 9%. Auto loans on new cars average around 6.5%, but climb above 11% for used vehicles with weaker credit. So the question becomes, if you have a student loan at 7%, should you pay it off aggressively or invest the difference in the market? And the honest answer is that it depends on something most financial content refuses to talk about. It depends on you, not on what you plan to do, on what you will actually do. Here is what I mean. The math says, if your student loan charges 7% and the market averages 10%, then every dollar you invest, instead of prepaying the loan, earns a 3% spread over time. That 3%, compounded over 20 or 30 years, is real money. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for some households. On a spreadsheet, The case for investing wins. But a spreadsheet does not have a bad week. A spreadsheet does not open the brokerage app during a correction, see a 15% drop, and sell everything at the bottom. A spreadsheet does not forget to increase contributions after a raise. A spreadsheet does not mean to invest every month, but actually skip 4 months because the money quietly got absorbed into lifestyle. And that is the behavioral test. If you are the kind of person who will actually invest the money consistently, who will not panic during a downturn, who will automate the contributions and never touch them, then investing while carrying moderate rate debt can work. The math supports it. But if you are honest with yourself and you know that the extra money is more likely to drift into spending than into a brokerage account, then paying off the loan is not the mathematically optimal move, but it is the move that actually produces a result. A guaranteed return at 7% that you actually capture beats a theoretical return at 10% that you never execute. Behavioral finance researchers have a name for why this happens: loss aversion. People feel the pain of a loss roughly twice as strongly as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Debt feels heavy. It drains attention. Individuals carrying significant debt are roughly 3 times more likely to report symptoms of anxiety and depression. That psychological weight is not a footnote. It affects the quality of every financial decision that comes after it. If carrying student debt keeps you from looking at your finances at all, if it makes you avoid your accounts, if it stops you from negotiating a raise or changing jobs because the debt feels like a ceiling on what you deserve, then the emotional cost is compounding alongside the interest. 32% of student loan borrowers say they have delayed buying a home because of their debt. That is not just a missed milestone. A delayed home purchase in a market where prices appreciate over time is a measurable financial cost that never shows up on the loan statement. So the rule for Layer 3 is not a single number, it is a filter. If your debt is between 6 and 10%, ask yourself one question. Will I actually invest the money I am not putting toward this loan? Not plan to, not intend to. Will I actually do it consistently for years, including the years when the market drops 30% and every headline tells me I am a fool for staying in? If the answer is yes and you can be honest about it, then investing while making normal payments on moderate rate debt is a defensible strategy. Contribute to the 401k beyond the match. Open a Roth IRA. Automate the contributions. Let the 3% spread work in your favor over decades. And the decades matter more than most people realize. Run the numbers on what waiting costs. A person who invests $500 a month starting at 30 and continues for 30 years at the market's long-run average of roughly 10% ends up with something in the range of $1.1 million. A person who waits 5 years, starts at 35, and invests the same amount for 25 years ends up closer to $660,000. Same contribution, same monthly effort, but the 5-year delay costs nearly $470,000. Even if you use the more conservative inflation-adjusted average of 7%, the gap is still over $200,000. That is the cost of waiting, not the cost of bad decisions. The cost of good intentions that start late. So for someone like Dana, who might also be carrying an older student loan at 7% alongside her credit card debt, the framework looks like this. The credit card at 22% gets killed in Layer 2. But the student loan at 7% is a different conversation. If Dana is the type to automate her investing and not touch it, she can make normal payments on the student loan while her 401k and a Roth work in the background. If she is not, she should channel the freed-up cash from the paid-off credit card straight into the student loan balance. Take the guaranteed 7% and invest with her full income once the debt is gone. Both paths can work. The difference is not intelligence. The difference is self-knowledge. If the answer is no, or if you are not sure, then pay the debt. Take the guaranteed return. Remove the psychological weight. Free up the monthly cash flow. And then invest with a clean balance sheet and a clearer head. There is no shame in that second path. In fact, for a lot of households, it is the path that actually works, because the debt payoff creates a behavioral momentum that the theoretical spread never does. One thing worth noting here, student loans in particular are going through a period of real uncertainty. Repayment rules are changing. Forgiveness programs are being restructured. If you are carrying federal student loans and are unsure about your repayment plan, the worst thing you can do is ignore them. Right now, roughly 16% of student loan balances are in serious delinquency. That is not a system working smoothly. Whether you choose to pay aggressively or invest alongside normal payments, make sure you are at least current and enrolled in the right repayment plan for your situation. Now, Layer 3 covers debt between roughly 6 and 10%. But what about the debt that charges less than 7? What about the mortgage? That is Layer 4. And it is the layer where the math looks clearest on paper, but the psychology gets the most complicated. Layer 4, the mortgage question. And this one trips up even people who got the first 3 layers right. Right now, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate sits around 6.5%. The stock market's long-run average is roughly 10. So the spread is about 3.5 percentage points. On paper, that means every dollar you invest instead of prepaying your mortgage should earn more over time than the interest you avoid. And over 30 years, that math has historically held up. If you run the numbers on someone who takes their extra $500 a month and invests it in a total market index fund, instead of making extra mortgage payments, they typically end up with more wealth at the end of the mortgage term than the person who paid the house off early. The compounding wins, not every year, not in every 5-year stretch. But over the full life of the loan, the market has outrun a 6.5% mortgage rate more often than it has not. So the math is real. But here is what the math does not capture. The spread between 6.5% and 10% is 3.5%. That is not wide. In any given decade, the market can underperform that average by a significant margin. From 2000 to 2009, the S&P 500 returned effectively nothing, including 2 major crashes. If you had bet your mortgage payoff money on the market during that decade, you would have ended up behind the person who simply paid down the house. Not because the strategy was wrong over a lifetime, but because a lifetime and a decade are different things, and your mortgage does not wait for the market to recover. So the honest position on Layer 4 is this. Mathematically, investing tends to win over long periods when your debt is below 7%. But the margin is not wide enough to call it a guarantee, and the person who pays off the mortgage early is not wrong. They are buying something the market cannot sell. They are buying certainty. A paid-off house cannot be margin called. It cannot drop 40% in a quarter. It reduces the monthly cost of being alive in a way that changes every decision after it, from career flexibility to retirement timing to how much risk you can stomach in the rest of your portfolio. The behavioral test from Layer 3 applies here too, but in reverse. If you are the kind of person who would genuinely invest the extra money and leave it alone for decades, then mathematically, keeping the mortgage and investing is a reasonable bet. But if paying off the house would give you the psychological freedom to take more career risk, retire 2 years earlier, or simply sleep without checking a balance, then the certainty has a real financial value that the spreadsheet does not measure. Neither path is a mistake. The mistake is pretending one side has no cost. Now let me zoom out for a moment because this is the part where the whole framework clicks. If this has been useful so far, this is the kind of breakdown we publish every week. One mechanism, explained honestly, with real numbers. Subscribe if you want the systems, not the slogans. Here is what the 4 layers look like stacked together. Layer 0. Build a small emergency buffer of $1,500 to $2,000 before anything else. This is a firewall, not a strategy. Layer 1. Contribute at least enough to your 401k to capture the full employer match. This is a guaranteed return that no debt payoff can replicate. For most workers, this means contributing 3 to 5% of salary. Layer 2. Kill all debt above roughly 10% interest. Credit cards, used auto loans, high-rate personal loans, payday debt, store financing with deferred interest. This is not a debate. The math is settled. No realistic investment return beats 22% guaranteed cost. Layer 3. For debt between roughly 6 and 10%, apply the behavioral test. If you will actually invest the money consistently through downturns without panic selling, then invest while making normal payments on the debt. If you will not, pay the debt and take the guaranteed return. Both paths work. The difference is self-knowledge. Layer 4. For debt around 6 to 7%, primarily mortgages and some federal student loans, the math slightly favors investing over the long run. But the spread is narrow and the certainty of paying off the debt has real value. Choose based on what freedom means to you. Neither answer is wrong. That is the full order of operations. And notice what it does not say. It does not say pay off all debt before investing. It does not say invest while ignoring debt. It says there is a sequence, and the sequence changes based on the cost of the debt you are carrying. The person with credit card debt at 22% and the person with a mortgage at 6.5% are not facing the same question, even though the internet gives them the same answer. There is one more thing worth addressing because it comes up every time this topic is discussed, and ignoring it would make this incomplete. What about the people who say they do not have enough money for either option? If every dollar is spoken for, if the paycheck is gone before the month ends, if there is genuinely nothing left after rent and groceries and the minimum payments, then this framework does not start with layer 0. It starts with something harder. It starts with finding the first $50, canceling the subscription that survives on autopay inertia, selling the item in the garage that has been sitting there for 2 years, picking up 4 hours of overtime or a weekend shift. Not because $50 solves anything by itself, but because $50 is the difference between a plan and a wish. Once the money exists, even a small amount, the framework tells you exactly where it goes. And for Dana and Marcus, the path is now specific. Dana restarts her 401k at 3% to recapture the match. She takes every other available dollar and kills the credit card at 22%. Once the card is gone, she evaluates her student loan using the behavioral test. She either invests alongside normal payments or accelerates the payoff. Her choice, her self-knowledge. Marcus stops the brokerage contributions today. He redirects the full $400 a month to his credit card. At that pace, the $6,400 is gone in about 18 months, saving him thousands in interest he would have paid over the next decade. Once the card is dead, he restarts the brokerage and the 401k together. Same question, 2 different answers. Both correct once the sequence is right. So which one actually wins? Killing debt or building wealth? By now, you already know why the question is broken. It assumes the 2 sides are opposites, when in reality, they are layers in the same system. Debt and wealth are not competing goals. They are sequential problems. And the sequence is what determines whether you end up ahead or behind. The person who pays off every last dollar of debt before investing a penny is not being disciplined. They are being incomplete. Because if they skip the employer match to do it, they threw away a guaranteed return that no debt payoff can replace. The person who invests while ignoring high-interest debt is not being strategic. They are losing a race they did not know they entered. Because no long-run market average outpaces a credit card at 22%. And the person who does nothing, paralyzed by the question itself, is paying the most expensive fee of all. The fee on time. 5 years of waiting to invest $500 a month costs roughly $470,000 by the time retirement arrives. That is not money lost to a bad decision. That is money lost to no decision. To a question that felt too complicated, so it sat in a browser tab while the months passed. That is the real answer to the title of this video. Neither side wins unless the order is right, and the order is not complicated. It is 4 layers. Start with a small buffer so that the next emergency does not send you back to the credit card. Then capture the employer match because 100% return on day 1 is the single best deal in personal finance. Then kill every debt charging more than 10% because no portfolio outruns that kind of interest. Then face the gray zone with honesty. Ask yourself whether you will actually invest the difference or whether paying off the moderate rate debt will free you to build wealth with a clearer head and a lighter balance sheet. And if your biggest remaining debt is a mortgage around 6 or 7%, know that the math slightly favors investing, but certainty has value too, and choosing to pay it off early is not a mistake if it buys you freedom you would not otherwise have. That is it. 4 layers, 1 sequence. And the only variable that changes the answer is the interest rate on the debt you are carrying and the honesty you bring to the behavioral test. Let me come back to Dana and Marcus one more time. Dana, 6 months ago, sat in her apartment and made a choice that felt brave. She killed her retirement contributions to go to war with her credit card debt. And the impulse was right. The debt was real. The interest was real. The stress was real. But the sequence was wrong. She surrendered the one guaranteed return that was fighting on her side. If Dana restarts her 401k at 3% today, she recaptures the match. That is $2,160 a year her employer puts in for her. Over the next 26 years, until she is 60, even at a conservative estimate of 7% real growth, that match alone becomes something in the range of $150,000. She never earned it. She never sacrificed for it. She just stopped saying no to it. Meanwhile, with every other available dollar aimed at the credit card, she can still kill the $8,200 in about 14 to 16 months. The credit card dies. The match compounds. Both things happen. The order just had to change. Marcus has a simpler fix, but a harder admission. He has to stop investing for a while, not forever, for about 18 months. Long enough to take the $400 a month he was sending to his brokerage account and point it at the credit card instead. The $6,400 balance goes to zero. The 22% interest disappears. And once the card is dead, every dollar Marcus invests after that grows without a leak underneath it. The portfolio he builds on a clean balance sheet will be worth more than the one he was building on top of debt because the compounding no longer has to outrun the interest. Here is one way to see what that 18-month pause actually costs him in the long run. If Marcus restarts investing at $400 a month at 37 and keeps going until 60, that is 23 years of compounding. At the market's long-run average, he ends up with something north of $400,000. If he had kept investing on top of the credit card debt, the market gains would have been partially eaten by the 22% interest accruing on the other side of his balance sheet. The pause is not a setback. The pause is the thing that makes the rest of the math work. Neither of them needed a different question. They needed a different order. The math was never the mystery. The order was, debt has a price, but so does waiting. And the most expensive version of waiting is not laziness. It is standing in front of the question, knowing it matters, and choosing not to move because the answer feels too complicated. It is not complicated. You just heard the whole framework. 4 layers, 1 sequence. The only thing left is to pull out your phone and check 3 numbers. First, your highest interest rate. Whatever debt you are carrying, find the one with the biggest rate. If it is above 10%, that is layer 2, and it comes next. Second, your employer match percentage. Log into your benefits portal or call HR and find out how much your employer matches, what percentage you need to contribute to capture the full amount, and whether you are currently doing it. If you are leaving match money on the table, that is layer 1, and it comes before the extra debt payments. Third, your emergency buffer. Check your savings account. If the number is below $1,500, that is layer 0, and it comes before everything. Those 3 numbers tell you exactly where your next dollar belongs. Not theory, not a debate, a decision. And it takes less than 10 minutes to find all 3. If this framework made the question clearer, the video that goes deepest on the system underneath all of it is the one that covers the full financial foundation, the complete order of accounts, contribution rules, tax advantages, and the architecture that makes every rule in this video actually stick. That is the companion video. It is the first chapter of the system this video is a part of. I will see you there.